Nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Itam Shri Radhika Prana Natha Sarojayo Yena Premanubhutyasha Dattam Tam Shri Gurum Bhaje. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shashvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payora Shomura Kedato Bande Bhagavatani Mananulavam Murdna Nipatyakshito Namah Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupadi Kripa Krite Yashri Chaitanya Rupa Bhut Tanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surito Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Vairagya Yug Bhakti Rasam Prayatna Rapayayan Mam Anubhipsu Mandam Kripam Budirya Paraduka Duki Sanatanam Tam Prabhumashrayami Abhirapali Patiputra Kanta Dasyati Balash Dasyabhilashati Balashvavara Shri Rupa Chintamali Sapti Sangsto Matsvanta Durdanta Haechurastam Raganugami Bhajano Lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya Sahasara Smaratam Brajendhum Shri Rupa Pada Kamala Shrita Cheta Samme Chitam Satam Madhukari Yatu Pada Padme Ya Bhakti Sorry, just still getting over a little bit of a cough. Ya Brahma Sakshat Kriter Anandati Shaya Prada Vishaya Jat Muktya Sukyat Vimuktir Yaya Shri Radha Ramanam Param Bhajayugam Yasya Mahanashrayo Ya Karya Vrajalokavat Gurutara Prem Naiva Tasyai Namah. By the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar, Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the foremost of Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharyas, Shri Sanatana Gosvamipada. Again, today we'll continue our discussion of the subject and section on Sharanapati, or Saranagati, in Hari-bhakti-vilasa, as a subpart of our discussion of the Sanatana Shiksha in the Caitanya-caritamrta with reference to the Saranagati Prakaran therein. So we're in the middle of this section on the Mahatmya, or the greatness of Sharanapati, and we've come to a citation from Srimad Bhagavatam, which comes from the very first chapter of the text, and which speaks about the purifying power of Sharanagatas. So, to show the greatness of Sharanagati, the greatness of those who have Sharanagati is shown. So if those who are Sharanagatas have such great power such that they can immediately purify others, then this shows how wonderfully purifying or wonderfully great Sharanagati is. So last time we had begun discussion of the commentary, and we got into a little bit of elaborate discussion because there's a triple interpretation of this phrase prashama ayana. prashamayanaha, qualifying the sages mentioned in this verse. So Sanatana has given 3 different interpretations of this word prashamayana. So we'll resume our discussion of that and then continue further. So I'm going to jump in here in the commentary on verse 20. Just restart this very long sentence which begins O Sutta, where he's glossing this term thrice in the midst of rendering the sense of the sentence. So he says, O Sutta, sages. So who are sages? How are they described? They're said here to be they who have taken shelter fully, in whose, meaning in Bhagavan's feet alone, meaning they who are Sharanagatas, and thus are, quote, prashama, completely equanimous. So that is, now here's the 3 interpretations, they whose path, ayanam, is that the form of which is complete tranquility, which is a characteristic of Sharanapati, or they whose path is complete equanimity, which is a means of accomplishment of Saranagati, or they who are such that they attain complete equanimity, meaning prema, that on account of which complete peace, that is happiness, ensues. Purify others upon being nearly touched, that is honored just by nearness. That is, people become purified just by coming into the presence of sages of the aforesaid nature. So these sages are said to have this characteristic of being prashamayana. So one sense of that is that these sages are following a path, and that path is the path of complete tranquility. And that complete tranquility is a characteristic of Sharanagati. So we'll get into the specific lakshanas of Sharanagati at the end of this section. Sanatana hasn't discussed them yet. But, in gist we can say, because I think most people are already familiar with them, that to have complete confidence in Bhagavan's protection and to take shelter or to embrace his guardianship, this is tranquility. There's no way to feel peace otherwise. The only peace we can find is the peace that comes from being in the shelter of Bhagavan, from being confident in his protection. So those who are following this path, which is the nature of this path, the very nature of the path of the Sharanagati is a path of peace or shanti, because that shanti is there in that faith and in that protection of Bhagavan. That's one interpretation. Second interpretation, I won't elaborate again because last time I went into a bit of detail on that. One whose path is complete equanimity, which is a means of accomplishment of Sharanagati. So the other perspective is that to become a Sharanagata, one has to have an outlook or an attitude, a state of mind, which is equal towards the whole of one's environment. So last time I offered an interpretation or a contextualization of this interpretation with reference to Anucheda 106 in the book Sandarbha, where it's spoken about how the bhakta can honor all beings as vessels or what's called adishtanas, dwelling places of the Ishtadevata, and see that every interaction that one has with every living being is an unfolding of one's interaction or the ultimacy of one's relationship with the Ishtadevata. So by seeing everything within that context, then there is an equal vision towards everything. So then a third interpretation is he's saying that complete equanimity simply means prema, meaning complete peace or complete happiness, because that's what prema is, or prema produces a superlative form of happiness. So all interpretations are applicable. So someone who has Sharanagati in any of these forms, or equanimity in any of these forms, is here said to purify others just with their presence. So, moving on. Alternately, sages, that is, even former Atmaramas. So now he's backing up and now he's reinterpreting the word sages. So far he's got sages as loosely equivalent with bhaktas. Bhaktas meaning those who have this characteristic of complete equanimity or prashama, as per the three interpretations we just discussed. Or likely inspired by the famous Atmarama verse, Atmaramascha Munayo, when he's rendering this statement here, Munayo, the exact same plural form of the word muni, or sages, he's saying this could also be taken to refer to those Atmaramas that are mentioned a little later in the Bhagavatam. So in that context, he reads it in this way, saying, even former Atmaramas forsake their sageness, meaning their Atmaramatva, their remaining absorbed in the satisfaction found within the self, and verily become they who have taken shelter fully in whose feet. That is, they take shelter in Sri Bhagavan's feet and remain absorbed there, instead of in the satisfaction found within the self. Because the satisfaction found in the Paramatma or Bhagavan is greater than the satisfaction found within the Atma or self. So this is a major theme that is developed throughout the Bhagavatam. So certainly we can see why Sanatana Goswami would be inclined to offer another, interpretation here, which further, draws out or puts emphasis on that theme that's very central to the Bhagavatam and very much appreciated by the Gaudiya thinkers, if you will. So the rest is the same. In other words, if you interpret the word sages here to mean former Atmaramas who became Saranagatas, otherwise you can read the rest in the same way. So now the contrast. The waters of the Svarduni, that is the Ganga, on the contrary, have completely flown out from his feet, and do not rather remain right there. So this is, Sanatana writes here a little bit cryptically, so you have to kind of flush it out. So what he's saying, or what he's implying, is that these sages, they're always thinking about Bhagavan, so their minds are always right there near Bhagavan's feet. But the Ganga, no doubt it came from Bhagavan's feet, but then what did it do? It went away. It flowed far away from Bhagavan's feet. But the sages, their mind is always flowing towards Bhagavan's feet, or remaining fixed on Bhagavan's feet. The famous statement of Kapiladev, Madguna Shruti Matrena, Mayi Sarva Guhashai, Manogati Ravichanna Yatha Gangam Basam Buddho, that as the Ganga flows towards the ocean, so the flow of the mind is always uninterruptedly upon me when I am heard about. So the Ganga is going one way, and the mind under the influence of bhakti is going the opposite way. It's going towards Bhagavan. So Sanatana is drawing out a little, cleverly drawing out a distinction here between the Ganga and the mind of the sage. So more specifically, they, that is the Ganga's waters, are followers of an uneven path. That is, they come in touch with so many objects other than Bhagavan's feet. So what he's implying is that unlike the minds of the sages, which dwell only in Bhagavan's feet. So the Ganga is flowing away and it's coming in touch with so many other things. But the minds of the sages are always going towards and staying with the feet of Bhagavan and not interacting with objects other than that. Or they are only travelers to the ocean. That is, their destination is not Bhagavan's feet, but elsewhere, unlike the minds of the sages, whose only destination is Bhagavan's feet. Thus, although they are purifying by virtue of their relation with his feet, they purify only as a result of repeated honoring. That is, as a result of being honored repeatedly as a practice. So the implied meaning is, unlike the sages who purify others just by their presence, and that too not immediately. That is, the waters of the Ganga do not immediately purify anyone, unlike the sages who do purify others immediately. Thus, the excellence of Sharanagatas is shown. That is, thus the sages described in this verse, that is, the Sharanagatas, are to be regarded as even more purifying than the waters of the Ganga. And as we hear also in the 9th canto, in the account of Bhagirath Maharaj bringing the Ganga to the earth, then the Ganga initially objects, saying that when I fall, I'm going to crash through the earth, I'm going to end up in the lower talas, I don't want to come. And then Bhagirath Maharaj says, well, I'll manage that. And so he goes and pacifies, placates Shiv Thakur, who agrees to catch the Ganga coming down from Dhruvaloka, where she was, and through Svarga. So then Shiv became known as Gangadhar thereby. So now, okay, he comes back. Okay, Ma Ganga, don't worry, you won't fall into Rasatala. Shiv Thakur will be there to catch you. You can come. But she says, nope, still I don't want to come. Well, why not? Because so many people are going to bathe in me. I'm going to be polluted by all these people who want to purify their sins, and I'm going to have to interact with all these other things. So I don't want to come to the earth. So then Bhagirath Maharaj solves this one with some reasoning, and he says, no, I can't deny that will happen. That will happen. But it's not that only people will come and bathe in you and pollute you. Sadhus will too. Sadhus will bathe in you, and by the presence of by the presence of Bhagavan in the hearts of sadhus, you'll be purified of all of that sin or all of that pollution that is brought into you by these other people who are using you to absolve themselves of their past actions. So she agrees to this. So there also it's shown that the Ganga only came to the earth because she was assured that she would be purified by sadhus, or by bhaktas of Bhagavan. So that also is on this exact same theme, that a Sharanagata or a bhakta is even more purifying than the Ganga herself. In fact, the Sharanagatas purify the Ganga. And the Ganga cherishes this, not only recognizes this, but relies on this. So the overall theme here, the reason for the citation in the context, is to show the power of Sharanagati, that the Sharanagata, by virtue of Sharanagati, not only is pure in and of themselves, but can even purify others, and can purify others even more so than the Ganga can purify others. And then I'm adding to that, through reference to the 9th canto, that the Sharanagata can even purify the Ganga itself. Okay. So, now we'll come to the next verse. Dvitiye Shri Shukokto, in the 2nd canto, in a statement of Shri Shuka. Kirat Hunan Drapulindapul Kasha Abhira Shumbha Yavana Kasadaya Yanye Chapapayad Apashrayashrayaha Shuddhanti Tasmai Prabha Vishnave Namah. Kiratas, Hunas, Andras, Pulindas, Pulkashas, Abhiras, Shumbas, Yavanas, Kasas, and so forth, as well as other sinners, become purified upon taking shelter in those who have taken shelter in whom? Obeisances unto Him, the Almighty. So this is a statement of Shukadev. So Kimcha Kirat. The author cites this verse to further demonstrate how Sharanagatas purify others. So same theme as the previous citation. By just saying Kimcha only, then we understand that he's continuing the same logic or the same reasoning and illustrating it further with a second citation. Kiratas and so forth, that is those of sinful class. That is those who are born into castes of people whose way of life integrally contains sinful activities, or those who are members of castes into which one is born as a result of committing sin. And, quote, others, that is those who are sinful because of their own activity in their present birth, even though they were not born into a sinful class. become purified upon becoming they whose shelter is whom, namely Bhagavan, that is, Sharanagatas. All persons who are implicated in sin by caste or by action can become purified by taking shelter in those who have taken shelter in Bhagavan. So here we have a very clear, direct statement of that to take shelter in the Bhakta or in the Sharanagata who is sheltered in Bhagavan can purify even persons who by classical analysis are considered to be polluted or considered to be implicated in varieties of sin. So then he, the speaker, dispels doubt of impossibility in this regard. So someone might say, really? They might say, even persons like that can be purified just by taking shelter in the Sharanagatas of Bhagavan. Really? Is it like that? So to dispel any doubt about that, then what name does Shukadev use to speak about Bhagavan? He says, Prabhavishnave Nama. Prabhavishnu, which means who's, filled with power or filled with great strength, or here I've just given it simply as Almighty. So the Almighty, that is He of powerful nature. That is, by describing Sri Bhagavan here as Prabhavishnu, Almighty, he suggests that the purifying power of those who take shelter in Bhagavan is not to be considered overstated in this verse. So this is a nice, drawing out of the intent just from the choice of the name used to speak of Bhagavan. So in other words, to dispel any doubt that this purification is possible, then Shukadev reminds Parikshit that Bhagavan is almighty. So his power to purify cannot be questioned. There's no amount of bad that can exceed the amount of good that he can create. So, like this, another demonstrating the greatness of Sharanagati by showing the purifying power of Sharanagatas. So now we come to another citation. Tritiye Maitreyokto, in the third canto, in a statement of Maitreya. Kim dura param tesham pumsamudama chetasam yerashritas tirtapadas charano vyasanatyayah. What is difficult to accomplish for those persons of unfettered mind, by whom Tirtapada's feet, by which plight is destroyed, are taken shelter in? So I've just left the passive voice here. Pardon me if that's unpleasant to any English readers, but I've gotten used to it anyway. What he's basically saying is that if you take shelter in Bhagavan's feet, and those feet have the power to destroy all varieties of plight, then what is difficult to accomplish? If he who is almighty and the source of all capability is in your favor, then what are you incapable of? Nothing. This is just what he wants to say. So, yatas tesham kinchidapi asadyam nasti likati kim iti. Since nothing whatsoever is non-accomplishable for them, that is, for those who take shelter in Bhagavan, given that in the two previous verses it was explained that even sinful persons who take shelter in them become purified, the author writes Kim, that is, he cites this verse. So if these Sharanagatas have the ability to purify even the people that are the most polluted, then he's saying the implication of that is that they have the capacity to do anything then. If they can do that, what can't they do? So he's saying we should interpret the ability to purify the most polluted as equivalent to the ability to do anything and everything. So now he's citing this verse, which explicitly states that or implies that. So it says, what at all is difficult to accomplish for them? So it's a rhetorical question, meaning nothing. Rather, for them, indeed, everything is easy to do. So how are they described here? They're called Udama Chetasam, those of unfettered mind, which means for the resolute, that is, Sharanagatas of deep resolve. One of unfettered mind certainly perceives you. Yai, that is, the second half of the verse explains that those who take shelter in Bhagavan's feet overcome all plight, which implies that they attain the sight of Sri Bhagavan. So if the attainment of Bhagavat Darshan, of direct service to Bhagavan, is the ultimate attainment, then to say that they have come, so to speak, overcome all plight, he's taking that to mean here that they've achieved that. Because if you haven't achieved that, something's obstructing you from that, and that could be considered a state of distress or a state of plight. So if you're really free from any sort of adversariness of any type, then you've achieved the ultimate goal. So if they're said to be free from any adversariness, then they're regarded as having achieved the goal. This is how he's interpreting the statement. So from that, he's then saying that this idea that they are of unfettered mind means, he's saying that this means dhira, means their mind is firm, their mind is steady, they're not subject to distraction, they're not subject to divergence or deviation from their resolve, from their fundamental sankalpa. Anukulyasya sankalpa, as we'll get to in the lakshanas of Saranagati. The first is the vow or the determination that I will adhere to what is favorable to Bhagavan, favorable to bhakti, favorable to being a Saranagata. This is the very first lakshana of a Saranagata, is to have the sankalpa, the firm sankalpa that one will act in accord with this. So to be dhira, or here to be of unfettered mind, means to be able to act in accord with that sankalpa, or to bring one's thoughts, one's speech, one's actions in unwavering attunement with the sankalpa. This is the state of perfection, or the desired ultimate state. So he's interpreting uddamaceta to refer to that. But, very graciously, Sanatana Pada also offers a more liberal second interpretation of the term uddamacetasa to give some encouragement to folks like myself. So he says, Yadva uddamacetasam vivida manoratena asankochata itastata gachan manasanam api iti ashesha manorata siddhir apipreta. So he says, alternately, quote, for those of unfettered mind, means even for those whose mind goes here and there without hesitation as a result of having desires of various types. Thus, the fulfillment of all desires is intended. That is, it can alternately be understood that the intention of Maitreya in this verse is to imply that all the desires, even of persons possessed of numerous worldly desires, and those of uncontrolled minds, can have all their desires fulfilled by taking shelter in Sri Bhagavan's feet. So, uddamaceta, to say that the mind is, quote, unfettered or unobstructed. This is one way it can be seen as that it's steady, it's fixed, nothing's obstructing it from the goal that the object that it's meant to be fixed upon. That's how he takes it in the first sense. And then in the second sense, he's saying the mind is unfettered, means nothing's obstructing it, means it's just running around crazy, and no one can control it. So in other words, he's taking two exact opposite ideas out of the same compound. So what is it that causes the mind to be unstable? Why does the mind not remain fixed on an object? The cause is the desires that people have. Pardon me. So from the vasanas, from the samskaras, come the desires, from all these past experiences, from this anadya vidya, comes this unstable state of mind. So when the mind moves about here and there under the influence of these desires, so he's saying that ultimately, if a person takes shelter in Bhagavan's feet, they'll overcome this. In other words, gradually, by the purifying power of being a Saranagata, of receiving Bhagavan's grace, that even that state of instability of mind will gradually be rectified, and whatever aim that the person does have, they will ultimately reach, be they someone with some sakama interest in dharma, artha, and kama, or what have you, or be they a follower of the path of Uttama Bhakti. Whatever they have set their mind upon as their ultimate aim, they will ultimately gradually achieve that. So this is the second interpretation. So then he gives the reason. Why is it that these persons achieve such success? Tatra hetu maha yar iti. So he states the cause in this regard. Yai. The second half of the verse explains that those who take shelter in Sri Bhagavan's feet overcome all plight, which implies that they attain whatever objects they desire. Tirthapado Bhagavataha. Tirthapad refers to Bhagavan. So Bhagavan is known by the name Tirthapada, which can be understood to mean he whose feet are a tirtha, or he whose feet are the cause of all tirthas. Ekatirthashrayanadapi sarvam susiddhyati kim puna sarvatirthamaya gangaya prabhavashrayad iti bhava. Everything is attained even by taking shelter in one tirtha. So all the more, such can occur. Gosh, is this a typo? So all the more, such can occur. I think I don't need that. So, by taking shelter in the source of the Ganga, which contains all tirthas. That is, it goes without saying that everything can be attained by taking shelter in Bhagavan's feet, which are the source of even the Ganga, which in turn is considered to contain all the tirthas. So there's so much praise of so many tirthas. If someone can go and perform, whatever rite in such a tirtha, they can achieve their goal. So if one takes shelter in Bhagavan's feet, which is said to be the source of the purity of the Ganga, which is itself said to be the greatest of all tirthas, then what is lacking? Nothing is lacking. There certainly is all potential in that. Therefore, this is the purport, iti bhavaha. So the idea is that because Bhagavan's feet are so supremely purifying, even that person of unfettered mind can gradually achieve their goal, because Bhagavan's feet will lead to the purification of their mind. Vyasanam sangsaras tasya atyayo nasho yasmat yadva akara prashleshena abhyasano mokshas tasya api atyaya atikrama yasmat sa bhakti rasa vistaranat. So lastly he says, Sri Bhagavan's feet are that by which destruction of plight, that is samsara, occurs, or alternately, in accord with a full elision of the letter A. That is, in the phrase charano vyasana atyaya, that is charanaha vyasanatyaya, is interpreted, if this is interpreted, according to the rules of Sandhi, to instead be charana avyasanatyaya, then Sri Bhagavan's feet are that by which surpassing even of freedom from plight, that is moksha, occurs as a result of an outpouring of bhakti rasa. That is, since one who takes shelter in Bhagavan's feet experiences bhakti rasa, and the bliss one experiences in bhakti rasa is superior even to the bliss experienced in moksha. So, anyway, I won't elaborate too much on this. I think it's clear. This is a common point which has been made in numerous places, that the mind can't do without satisfaction. The satisfaction the mind will experience in bhakti is superlative. Therefore, as soon as someone experiences that superlative satisfaction that's found only in bhakti, then the mind will never gravitate towards anything else. Therefore, when one experiences this bhakti rasa, then one becomes, quote-unquote, free even from moksha, or surpasses or goes beyond even the state of moksha, such that they become disinterested in moksha and attached only to bhakti. So he's, by way of, seeing it as avyasana, he's taking out this meaning from the compound. Or rather from the statement, the first word in the compound. Anyway, so the purpose of the citation is to convey that in addition to Sharanagas being capable of purifying others, they can achieve everything they so desire. They can achieve any of the 4 Purusharthas, they can achieve the 5th Purushartha by the purifying power, the supportive power of Bhagavan's feet. Nothing is unattainable for them, even if at present they may be of unstable mind. Gradually, by adhering to the characteristics of Sharanagati and the gradual purification of the mind, all such will be attained. Such is the greatness of Sharanagati. So this is the purpose of this citation. So we'll come to the next. Dashame Nagapatni Stuto, in the 10th canto, in the praise offered by the wives of Kaliya. Nanaka Prishtam Nacha Sarvabhaumam, Na Parameshtyam Na Rasadhipatyam, Na Yoga Siddhira Punar Bhavam Va, Vanchanti Yat Padaraja Prapanna. Those who have taken shelter in a particle of the dust of whose, meaning Bhagavan's feet, desire neither the vault of heaven, nor domain over the entire earth, nor the post of Brahma, nor reign over Rasa, nor the siddhis of yoga, nor non-repetition of birth. So 3 times in the Bhagavatam we get this almost identical verse, just the last line varies slightly and there's a slight reordering of the elements, but in the 6th canto, in the words of Vritrasura, which Jiva Goswami praises as being an illustration of Priti for Bhagavan, and also later in Bhagavan's own words himself in his teachings to Uddhava, and then here in the words of the Nagapatnis to Sri Krishna, we find 3 times this repeated negation of every object other than Bhagavan's feet, or every object other than Bhakti to Bhagavan. And just as we've been, if I cross here, just as we've been discussing in the Padyavali classes, the 4th verse of the Shikshastakam, we see a direct parallel, na dhanam, na janam, na sundarim kavitam va, just as there's this placement of the negating particle before the object of the negation, so as to imply categorical negation, we see that Mahaprabhu has also employed this same rhetorical strategy in the Shikshastakam as is found in these statements in the Bhagavad. So I just recount this to say that this is indeed a very significant statement and a very frequently repeated theme throughout the texts as well as the works of the Acharyas. So Sanatana Pad comments on this as follows. Evam sharanapate sadhanatvam vilikya sadhyatam cha darshayan tadvatam paripurnatam likati na naketi. Having thus aptly described Sharanapati as being a means of accomplishment, or sadhana, the author shows its being an object to attain, or sadhya, and the complete fulfillment of those possessed of it, nanaka. He cites this verse. So in the previous verse, we heard how one can achieve everything by Sharanagati, and before that we're hearing Sharanagati has the power even to purify others who come in touch with its presence in the heart of one who has it. And so now he's going further and saying not only is Sharanagati great in the sense that it purifies people or it leads to the attainment of the goal, but Sharanagati can be regarded as the goal itself. In other words, those who have Sharanagati are paripurna. They are completely fulfilled. So that's what everyone is seeking. Everyone is seeking a state of fulfillment, a state of satisfaction. So the one who has Sharanagati is seen to have such satisfaction. So what proves that you're satisfied? That you don't want anything. Because desires arise from wants, in other words, lacks, or the absences of things. So when one is full, then desires evaporate. So he's saying that this negation of desire for all other things implies that there is a state of complete fulfillment on the part of those who are sheltered in Bhagavan. So because that state of fulfillment is said to be the goal, and that characteristic of that state is found in a Sharanagata, then he's saying that Sharanagati can also be regarded as the goal itself. So this is the reasoning. Then he gives some gloss of some of the items listed. Rasadipatyam pataladi swamyam yogasiddhi trikala gyatva adya kshudra mahatischa animadya yadva rasadipatyam vichitra rasa siddhyad daishvaryam yogasiddhir anima adya eva iti yatottaram esham shraishtyam. So, reign over rasa refers to rule over patala and so on, that is the lower planes within each Brahmanda. And the quote siddhis of yoga refers to minor ones, such as being cognizant of the 3 times, past, present, and future, and great ones such as minuteness. In other words, the stack of 8 commonly described siddhis, what are sometimes known as the main siddhis that are attainable. So alternately, the term rasadipatyam refers to the superhuman power acquired by means of various forms of alchemy or otherwise. And, quote, the siddhis of yoga refers to minuteness and so forth. Thus, the superiority of these is successive. That is, all the objects that are not desired by a Sharanagata are listed in order in the verse from lesser to greater. So liberation is listed last. This is considered the greatest thing. Slightly less than that are the siddhis. Lesser than that is rule of rasatala, etc. He's laying it out, said to be in an order here. But a question can arise in this respect. In this regard, the superiority of the dominion over the entire earth to the vault of heaven is because of the occurrence of full attainment of jnana, bhakti, and so on, by means of the special opportunity for non-attachment, vairagya, and so forth on earth, that is, in the field of karma, which is absent in svarga. So someone might say, okay, if this is listed in order of lesser to greater, and rule of the earth is said to be greater than rule of svarga, why is it considered to be greater to rule earth than to rule svarga? So many people on the earth are following all these Vedic yagyas to go to svarga. They're, pursuing svarga, and now you're saying that ruling the earth is better than ruling svarga. How is that? So he's saying that he's giving the perspective and saying the perspective is that on earth there's an opportunity to cultivate vairagya, to cultivate gyan, to cultivate bhakti in a way that you don't get even in svarga. So, therefore, from that perspective, rule of the earth or life on earth is better even than life in svarga. And now he gives a second reason, referring to an interesting case, and he says, and because of the occurrence of even Indra's attainment of sovereignty over svarga, occasionally, as a result of the assistance of emperors from the earth, such as Kakutsta, that is the son of Shashada, grandson of Ikshvaku, great-grandson of Manu, and ancestor of Bhagavan Ram, who on Bhagavan Vishnu's order assisted the Devas in defeating the Asuras in battle, and in the process rode atop Indra after Indra had been required to transform into a bull. So, I know I'm adding quite a bit here in the bracket. Sanatana Goswami doesn't give any more detail, but at least as far as I could research it, this seems to be the reason. In other words, why is rule of earth better than svarga? Because even Indra had to give a bull ride to some emperor on the earth just to play some trick to win some war against some asuras. So if he even had to bow down and carry on his back some emperor from the earth, then hey, wouldn't you rather be that emperor who got to ride on Indra's back? This appears to me to be what Sanatana Goswami is pointing at anyway. Anyway, not a hugely significant point. If the theme of the whole discussion is that we don't want any of these things anyway, then It's not that we need to be all that preoccupied with the greatness of life on earth, but there is also the point that Jiva Goswami makes that because in Svarga there's greater absorption in pleasurable objects of the senses than earthly life is considered more favorable for those who aspire to engage in spiritual practice than even the life of a devata, even though the devatas have at times darshan of Bhagavan and darshan of other rishis and other members of the higher lokas and all of this. Nevertheless, the intensity of the absorption in the pleasures of Svarga has such a diluting effect that even though they have all this ample knowledge and ample bodily facility, they don't have the mind, so to speak, to make the best use of it. Whereas without that opportunity for all of those pleasures, there's a greater sobriety to life on earth, which is considered highly conducive to spiritual aspiration. This is a point that comes out in the Krama Sandarbha. It's also cited in the Shat Sandarbha. Anyway, the rest is the same, or the rest is clear, so whether you take this interpretation or not. So lastly he says, Padaraja prapana Sharanagata tvena kanchidekam sambandham ashrita iti artaha. Those who have taken shelter in a particle of the dust of the feet of Bhagavan refers to those who have taken shelter in any one particular relation with Bhagavan by means of being a Sharanagata. That is, the relation of being Bhagavan's servant, friend, or otherwise. So this is a nice point of contextualization. So to say that those to take shelter in a particle of the dust of Bhagavan's feet. So this is figurative language, although no doubt Sharanagatas may actually take the dust and put it on their heads as a gesture of respect or a gesture of adoration. It's not just a gesture of adoration. Ultimately, that adoration exists in the context of a particular relationship between the adorer and the object of adoration. So he's saying that, more deeply speaking, to quote-unquote take shelter in a particle of the dust at Bhagavan's feet is to take shelter in a particular relationship with him or manner in which one is situated in his shelter and engaging in a relationship thereby. Okay, so I'll come to the next. This is verse 24. Ekadashe cha Sri Karana Bhajana Yogeshwaru Tare. In the 11th canto, in the answer of the master of yoga, Sri Karabhajana. So, Devarshi Bhuttapta Nrinam Pitrinam Naking Karunayam Rinim Charajan Sarvatmana Ya Sharanam Sharanyam Gato Mukundam Parihritya Kartam. O King, one who has relinquished one's duties and taken shelter completely in the ultimate shelterer, Mukunda, is neither a servant of nor a debtor to the devas, the rishis, other living beings, relatives, humanity, or ancestors. So this is a very significant verse in the Bhagavatam regarding adhikar for the path of bhakti in contrast to the adhikar for the path of karma, and the significance of Shraddha, or in other words, how Shraddha transforms one's adhikar and thus one's responsibilities. So, the Tika, Evam vidi nisheda nibritte kritya krityatam likati devarshi iti. In this way, he describes the successfulness of a bhakta's desistance from observance of injunctions and prohibitions. Devarshi, he states this verse. So, when one acquires Shraddha in bhakti, when one acquires the conviction that all of one's duties will be accomplished just by doing bhakti to Bhagavan, there's no need to fulfill some further duty outside of that, then one becomes eligible for the path of bhakti and loses one's eligibility for the path of karma. And thus, one desists from, or there's this nivritti, from the vidhi and nished, or from the injunctions and prohibitions that come along with the path of karma. So when one desists from that, then what happens, or what's the result of doing that? So this verse is describing the, quote, successfulness of that, or what is accomplished by that desistance. So therefore, when it says, one who has relinquished one's duties, Hari-bhakti-vilasa, when one has relinquished those duties, meaning one has acquired shraddha, and on the strength of that shraddha, one has acted upon it by no longer fulfilling the duties that one has on the path of karma, because one has conviction that by following the path of bhakti, that will automatically be accomplished, and thus take shelter in Bhagavan. Then what happens? Then one isn't a servant of or a debtor to any of those categories of persons that one is meant to serve on the path of karma. So you have to serve them as long as you think you have to serve them, and as soon as you realize that you don't actually have to serve them, if you instead serve Bhagavan, their original source and support, then you don't have to serve them. So you become exempt from having to serve them as soon as you truly believe that you don't actually need to. But not just because you're going to throw away everything and do nothing, only because you're going to accept a deeper level of responsibility, a deeper level of commitment, and a deeper level of self-giving by taking to the path of bhakti. So it's not a license to just do nothing or neglect any path at all, but it's an instance of becoming freed from certain prohibitions and injunctions because one has actually adopted a more strict set, in the sense that they're more ultimately demanding of one and encapsulating or encompassing the entire trajectory of one's eternal existence. So in this respect, there is a successfulness of desisting from the injunctions and prohibitions on the path of karma. So he gives some gloss of the elements listed. Apta pushya kutumbani devadya panchayagya devata etesham yatha bhakti rini ata ev tesham kinkara tarartam nityam panchayagyadi karta tatacha smriti hinajatim parikshi nam rinamartam karma karayet iti ayam tu na tata. So relatives refers to dependents and family members. The others, that is the 5 other groups mentioned in the verse, beginning with the devas, refers to the devatas of the 5 yagyas. So the objects of worship in the 5 types of sacrifice customarily performed each day by all householders. So the idea in the Karma Marg is that every day one is benefited by all of these groups. Not a day goes by that we're not benefited by the devatas who allocate us the consequences of our actions, who allocate the energies and the activities that sustain life in the world. Not a day goes by that we're not benefited by the sages who've preserved and propagated knowledge of how to live, how to survive, and how to engage in all sorts of spiritual practices and observe social conduct and so forth. So we're indebted to the sages, we're indebted to other living beings, we're indebted to our relatives, we're indebted to our ancestors. This is common sense. We are born into a family, we have a home, we have, people who raise us, who teach us, who take care of us, who forgive us for our mistakes, who help us achieve our goals, etc. We're indebted to human beings that we share resources with and mutually benefit from a shared social contract, etc., etc. So everyone naturally is benefited by and thus indebted to all of these various classes of beings. So in the Karma Marg, there's a set of rituals that are traditionally followed by especially grihastas, which are manners of honoring all 5 of or all 6 of those groups, so as though, so to speak, cancel one's debt to them by, rather fostering gratitude and recognizing the benefit that one receives from them and worshipping them. So this is what he's referring to here. So as a non-bhakta is a debtor to them, and thus a servant of them and a daily performer of the 5 yajnas and so forth for the sake of clearing that debt. As also stated in the Smriti Shastra, quote, one should cause a person of lower caste to perform karma for the sake of discharging their debt. So a bhakta, on the contrary, is not. That is, a bhakta is not a debtor to these 6 groups and thus not a performer of any sacrifices for the sake of clearing any such debt to them. So who is the bhakta then? Koso yasarva bhavina mukundam sarvato mokshadam paramananda pradam cha bhagavantam sharanam gata kartam krityam parihritya. So who is the bhakta? He is one who has completely taken shelter in Sri Mukunda, that is Bhagavan, the giver in all respects of moksha and bestower of the highest bliss, having relinquished his duties, that is the acts that would otherwise be required of him for the sake of clearing his debts to the devatas and so forth. Okay, so this is, up to here, this is the standard way the verse is often discussed. Now Sanatana Pod gives an alternate interpretation to the word kartam, which we don't find any other commentators offer. It's, a broad recognition of the scope and meaning that the verse can have. So he says, yadva, oh gosh, that looks like a typo, it should be yadva. Kartum bhedam kriti chedane iti asmat vasudeva sarvamiti iti buddhya iti artaha. Yadva advaita nishtopi bhutva iti artaha. So he says, where am I? Or alternately, as per usage of the word kriti, from which the word kartam in the verse can be derived in the sense of division or chedana, the meaning is, quote, having relinquished perception of distinction by means of the understanding described in Bhagavad Gita 7:19, Vasudeva Sarvam Iti, everything, Vasudev is everything. So this is a much less common meaning of the word karta. Here in the previous interpretation, it was interpreted to mean kritya, or duties, but he's saying that another meaning of the root from which the word is built can also refer to chedana, or dividing or cutting something, so it can refer to a division. In other words, a perception of a duality. So then he interprets it then to say that a person who not gives up duties, but gives up distinctions, gives up recognition of dualities. And how do they do that? By the understanding Vasudev is everything, Vasudev Sarvamiti, that they perceive with the world with an emphasis upon the singular constitutionality of it, if you will, rather than the specific differentiation that might so also be something, someone, everyone typically puts attention to. So, in other words, what he's referring to here is persons who are following the path of Gyan. So this is the meaning. Alternately, quote, being even of fixity and non-duality, or Advaita, is the meaning. That is alternately the meaning of, quote, relinquishing distinction, is that even one who takes shelter in Bhagavan and relinquishes all view of divisions, that is, dualities, gosh, there's a typo, as is done by Gyanis holding a non-dualistic viewpoint, also is no longer a detutu or a servant of the devas and so forth. So just as those who take up the path of Gyan also renounce the path of karma, just as those who take up the path of bhakti do, so he gives some reasoning based on this second interpretation in this verse, how this verse, in other words, can also be conceived as a reference to a Gyani, and how Saranagati can also be part of the path of Gyan, which is something that he mentioned a little bit earlier, something that Jiva Goswami also touches on, and that evidently is part of the teachings among some followers of various strains of Advaitavad. So that's not a major focus for us, but nevertheless, we can understand this much, that the process of Saranagati, the process of seeing a whole to which one belongs and, so to speak, giving or sheltering oneself in that, can also be a way of by which people take a step towards attempting to transcend dualities. So for those who take it in that light, they also, by acquiring the adhikar for gyan, give up the adhikar for karma. So this is the second interpretation he offers. So I'll stop there. I think we're out of time for today. So we're almost done with the Mahatmya section. We'll finish it next time. And then we'll come to perhaps the most practical and significant section of this whole, broader section, the lakshanas, or the specific characteristics of what Saranagati is, which will be, food for our own introspection and personal practice. So I'll conclude here. If anyone has comments, questions, corrections, or any other feedback, please feel free to share at this time.
In connection with the conception of being in debt, it's interesting, it brings a deeper appreciation. Srila Prabhupada used to mention, I guess it was a Bengali proverb or something, who is peaceful? He who is peaceful is he who neither has any debt and also who resides at home.
Okay, thank you for sharing. That's, I believe that comes from the Bhishma Yudhishthir Sangvad, when, Yamaraj, when he comes in the form of the crane and he's interviewing the Pandavas, then that's one of the questions that he asks. And this answer is given, just as you said, that the person free from debt, who doesn't have to go abroad to earn, but can stay at home without having to go out, he's a happy guy. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. There's another verse in the Bhagavatam in the second canto. I can't remember how it goes now, but it says that just as a person who has gone out abroad and worked and comes home with all the wealth that they've earned and now no need to go out anywhere, feels very happy to stay at home, just like that, the person who takes shelter in Bhagavan feels such satisfaction that they don't like to go anywhere. So, on the same theme. All right, well, we can let it be here for today. So I'll conclude, and if we're so blessed, next week we'll look further at some of these sublime points made on the subject of Saranagati here by Sri Sanatana Gosvamipada. Vaishnavibhyo namo namo, Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.